did you see what just happened here? I was standing back over there, and Anna introduced me, and then I came up here. So that if anyone ever asks you how I got here, you can tell them that that's what happened. Because it's human nature that when we have a disaster, we look at the last event preceding it. And of course, if we had the media or politicians present, they would cry out for Anna's resignation, but she really had very little to do with my being here. Perhaps a better example is not long ago, my aunt passed away. She was a very dear, good-hearted woman, but she was in her mid-90s, so it was neither a shock nor surprising when she went. And they were going to have the funeral down in the suburbs of Houston, Texas. She had lived down there and was going to be laid to rest there, and they thought, well, what the heck, we'll have the funeral here too. So that was the idea. And meanwhile, it was my mother's older sister, and so I had to find a way to get from here to there. I immediately went online to look up to get an airline reservation. And I found that the airline fares from here to Houston were just kind of outrageous. It was much higher than a similar distance going almost anywhere else. And I don't like to fly anyway since 9/11. The airports are just a terrible hassle. But I had wonderful memories of a business trip I took a couple years ago down to New Orleans on the train. So I went to the Amtrak website. Now, train travel was wonderful because I didn't have to go to an airport. I just went to the station in my town. And I waited on the platform. The train pulled in. I got on board with a suitcase. The train arrived at the station in New Orleans. I got off with a suitcase and walked to the hotel, which was only 2 blocks away. Now, what could be simpler than that? It was a wonderful trip. But now I find that the train from D.C. to New Orleans terminates in New Orleans. And you have to switch to another train. But that connection leaves 1 hour before the D.C. train arrives. So it's a 23-hour layover. I thought that was a little crazy. So does Amtrak, by the way. They recommended an alternate route. They wanted me to go into Union Station and go to Chicago, and from Chicago down to Houston. There's a much shorter layover, but the trip takes just as long. It is half the price of the airfare. I thought that was the plus. I went to look at the bus fares and that sort of thing. It takes just as long and costs just as much. So then I looked at driving. And I found that drive time is about 24 hours, more or less. And the cost is about the same as the train. So I floated that idea amongst my family and colleagues, and those who expressed an opinion were uniformly against it. You're going to fall asleep. You're going to have an accident. If you get there at all, you'll be too exhausted to know what's going on. But see, they hadn't reckoned with the fact that just a couple months earlier, I turned 65. And at 65, I had a list of things I can't do anymore. But driving is not on the list yet. And neither is staying up all night. So that cinched the deal. And I took my little red Mazda over and got the air checked in, I put gas in the tank, and I bought snacks, because if you're eating, you can't fall asleep. So I had cherry tomatoes and baby carrots and grapes and bananas, and I made little roll-ups with Lebanon bologna, and because I wasn't stopping for anything. All my meals were going to be carried, and I had cans of V8 and water and all kinds of good stuff. It was all set up. And I left early in the morning, and the weather was great, and the roads are the envy of the world. And I took off, and I had my little mixed disc CDs with Edith Piaf and Johnny Cash and Ray Charles and the Beach Boys. I had all these guys. And I'm sailing along. Now, if I'd had my family with me, I would have taken the southern route along the Gulf Coast because it's more scenic, but I wanted to make time, so I took the northern route. And in the wee hours of the morning, I stopped at a rest stop in Mississippi, took an hour's nap, back on the road, went off again, and as I left, some words began coming to me about my aunt, and I put together a little prose poem about her and her sisters. And by the time I got to Houston, I had it all worked out. Now, people today do a lot of texting. You have to look to text. To write, you don't. I had a notepad, I just scribbled things down. And so I got down there, and I had this thing. I was going to show it to my cousins and so forth, but they, to my surprise, when at the funeral, they asked if I wanted to stand up and say a few words, and by George, I had it right in my pocket. So much for the idea of not being able to function. I had everything done. Now, my plan was to come back up here, leaving early in the morning again, but when you're visiting people you haven't seen in a long time, you stay a little longer, so I got away at late afternoon. And it was about midnight when I got back up to I-20, crossed over into Louisiana and near Shreveport. Now, I didn't know Shreveport had casino gambling, but they were lit up like Las Vegas on a Saturday night. It was neon everywhere. And then you get to the other side, and it's like going in a tunnel. Just everything is black. It's a weekday at midnight, and there's nobody on the road. And there are no lights, and there are no buildings. There's nothing but me and the white lines on the road, and it's like sailing through space. Now, when I was younger, that was the ideal time to drive, because you figure anything that's going to cause you trouble has got lights on it. But now that I'm older and I know about deer, I was a little concerned. Not concerned enough to slow down, mind you, but concerned. And then I had my best girls on the CD. I was listening to Marsha Ball and Mandy Barnett and Candy Kane and Linda Ronstadt. They were just wonderful and keeping me company. And I'm flying along, and then I see some lights up in front of me, and I say, "Oh, well, I'm not alone on the road." And it's a tractor trailer, big one. That's good. That's what I expect to see. And he's in the left lane, and he's going very slowly. Well, that's his problem. I will wave to him as I drive by. And as I get closer, I see that there are 3 tractor trailers going practically bumper to bumper, and they're going they're creeping along at like 20 miles an hour or something. And I begin to think, maybe they know something I don't know. So I put my foot on the brake, and I was going down from 80 to 20 in about that many feet. And slowing way down, and from out of the darkness, this big charcoal gray wall just comes right up at me. And when I saw that, then the foot goes all the way down, screeching. I'm out about a foot in front of this thing. It had little ripples like a curtain, and then I realized it wasn't like a curtain. These are the ribs on the bottom of a 40-foot trailer that has been overturned. It's exactly perpendicular across the entire lane, and the tractor is somewhere off in the trees. So I put on my emergency flashers. I've got a little emergency helmet that has a flashlight on the thing, so I put that on. I knew it looked silly, but had a little light. And I walked around in front. When I got there, I saw that there were 2 other truck drivers had stopped in front, and they had come back, and the driver in this rig was just kicking out the windshield and crawling out, and he was saying that he was all right. And one of the other drivers noticed that it was a refrigerated trailer, and that the refrigeration motor was going. He said we should cut that off in case there's any leaking fuel. And I could see these guys knew what they were doing, and they didn't need me. And I started to back away, and then I saw the Louisiana State Trooper coming up, and he was laying out flares, so they didn't need my emergency flashers, and I got back in the car. And I thought about how you have all these steps, and if one step is missing, then you don't have the disaster outcome. And that's why you don't have a truck driver standing here telling you about the night he saw a little red Mazda go splat into the bottom of an overturned trailer. And I was thinking about all the thousands of people out there who prevent disasters every day simply by doing their jobs. And tonight I would like to offer a toast to the long haul truckers.